A 220-pound teenager was humiliated when the most beautiful girl in school invited him to her party. Her cruel laughter echoed through the halls as she revealed it was all a bet. 2 years later, at their senior prom, she would discover that karma wears many faces. What happened that night would shatter her perfect world and expose a dark family secret. Before this emotional story begins, leave a comment letting us know which city you're watching from, and don't forget to like for good karma. William spent another lonely lunch hour in the far corner of Westbrook High's cafeteria, trying to make himself invisible, a nearly impossible task for a 220-pound teenager. His oversized hoodie, his constant companion, did little to shield him from the whispers and pointing fingers of his classmates. But even on his worst days, there was one bright spot that made school bearable: Sarah Mitchell. She moved through the cafeteria like sunlight, her perfect smile brightening every corner except his. William watched her from afar, knowing someone like her would never notice someone like him. Sarah was everything he wasn't: popular, beautiful, and seemingly perfect. Her designer clothes and confident stride made her seem untouchable, like she belonged to a different world entirely, a world William could only dream about. Then one day, the impossible happened. As William struggled with his locker combination, a gentle tap on his shoulder made him jump. He turned around and his heart nearly stopped. It was Sarah, standing closer to him than she ever had before. "Hi, William," she said, her voice sweet as honey. "I'm having a party at my house this Saturday. Would you like to come?" She handed him a golden-edged invitation card, her manicured fingers briefly brushing against his trembling hand. William stood frozen, his mouth dry, his heart pounding so loud he was sure she could hear it. Was this really happening? The girl he'd dreamed about for 2 years was actually inviting him to her party. I'd love to," he managed to stammer, clutching the invitation like it might disappear if he held it too loosely. Sarah's smile widened. "Great. And William?" She paused, glancing at his worn hoodie. "Make sure you dress nice. It's a formal party." That evening, William emptied his savings account. $300 he'd earned from mowing lawns all summer. But it wasn't enough. He needed to look perfect. This was his one chance to show Sarah he could belong in her world. He borrowed money from the few friends he had, promising to pay them back double after his next paycheck. He even pawned his grandfather's watch, the only thing he had left of him. With trembling hands, he rented a sleek black tuxedo and, in a moment of desperate courage, borrowed his uncle's luxury car. The night of the party, William arrived at Sarah's mansion feeling like a different person. The borrowed car, the expensive tuxedo, the carefully wrapped gift he'd spent far too much on. It all made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he could be worthy of someone like Sarah. The party was already in full swing when he stepped through the grand double doors. Music pulsed through the air, and clusters of his classmates filled the sprawling living room. William scanned the crowd, his heart racing when he spotted Sarah in a stunning red dress. She smiled when she saw him, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. "William, you actually came." She walked over, taking the gift from his shaking hands. "And you cleaned up so nice." That's when he should have noticed something was off. The way some students were filming with their phones, the barely contained snickers, the knowing looks being exchanged. But William was too caught up in his dream to see the nightmare coming. Sarah suddenly raised her voice, calling for everyone's attention. The music stopped. All eyes turned to them. William's heart soared. Surely she was about to say something nice about him coming to the party. "Everyone," Sarah announced, her sweet smile turning cruel. "I'd like you to meet our entertainment for the night." She turned to William, her eyes now cold as ice. Did you really think I'd actually invite someone like you to my party? The room erupted in laughter. Phones were everywhere, recording his humiliation. It was a bet, Sarah continued, her voice dripping with mockery. My friends bet me I couldn't get the fattest kid in school to fall for me. William's world crumbled. The room began to spin. He could feel his face burning, tears threatening to spill from his eyes. But it wasn't over. Sarah's real boyfriend stepped forward from the crowd, looking William up and down with disgust. Look at him. He actually rented a tux. More laughter. Did you think you could ever be good enough for someone like Sarah? The gift William had bought, an expensive necklace he'd spent weeks saving for, slipped from Sarah's hands, landing with a thud that seemed to echo through his soul. Or he even bought me a present, she cooed mockingly. How pathetic. Someone shouted, Hey, fatty, say something for the camera. Another voice chimed in, This is totally going viral. William couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. The laughter, the phones, Sarah's cruel smile. It was all too much. He turned and ran, tears now flowing freely down his face. He could hear their laughter following him down the grand hallway, out the door, into the night. As he fumbled with the car keys, dropping them twice because his hands were shaking so badly, William heard Sarah's voice drift from an open window. Make sure you get his face in the video. I want him to remember this forever. That night, William drove home in a daze, his rented tuxedo soaked with tears. When he finally made it to his room, he collapsed on his bed, his body racked with sobs. His phone buzzed constantly. The videos were already spreading across social media. But as he lay there in the darkness, something else began to stir in his heart. Something darker than sadness, more powerful than shame. The seeds of revenge were being planted, watered by his tears and fertilized by their cruelty. 2 years, he whispered to himself, his hands clenched into fists. In 2 years, I'll make you feel exactly what I'm feeling right now. Little did Sarah know, but her cruel joke had set in motion a chain of events that would eventually shatter her perfect world. Because sometimes karma needs a little help delivering its message, and William was about to become karma's perfect messenger. For 2 weeks after the party, William disappeared. No one saw him at school, no one could reach him by phone. While his classmates' lives went on as normal, filled with their usual laughter and gossip, William's world had gone dark. In his room, surrounded by empty food containers and drawn curtains, he spent his days watching the videos of his humiliation go viral. The comments were worse than the actual event. OMG, did you see his face when she told him it was a bet? This is what happens when you don't know your place. Sarah Mitchell is a queen for this. His phone kept buzzing with notifications, new tags, new shares, new comments, each one a fresh cut to his already bleeding heart. The borrowed tuxedo still hung in his closet, a painful reminder of his shattered dreams. He hadn't even returned it yet, knowing he'd have to pay a late fee he couldn't afford. The money he'd borrowed from friends. They were already demanding it back, their messages growing increasingly threatening. But how could he face them after becoming the school's biggest joke? Finally, after 2 weeks of hiding, William knew he had to return to school. His mother, a night shift nurse who was rarely home, had started asking questions. The school had been calling about his absence. He couldn't hide forever. The morning he returned, William stopped at a convenience store and bought something he never thought he'd need. A plain black mask to cover his face. Maybe if they couldn't see his expression, they'd eventually leave him alone. He was wrong. The moment he stepped into the hallway, the whispers started, then the giggles, then the outright laughter. Sarah's voice cut through it all like a knife. "Oh, look, the circus is back in town." William kept his head down, clutching his books to his chest like a shield. Just make it through the day, he told himself. Just make it through. That's when he first noticed her, Grace Thompson. She was standing by her locker, watching the scene unfold with a mix of sadness and anger in her eyes. Unlike the others, she wasn't laughing. Grace was one of those students who seemed to exist on the periphery of high school life. She was pretty in a quiet way, but her second-hand clothes and scholarship status kept her out of Sarah's elite circle. What William didn't know then was that Grace had a unique perspective on Sarah's cruelty. She was the daughter of Sarah's family's housekeeper. As William hurried past, trying to make himself as small as possible, an impossible task for someone his size, one of Sarah's friends, Sandra, decided to take the joke further. She reached for his mask, intending to rip it off. "Let's see if he's still crying." Sandra laughed, her fingers inches from William's face. But before she could touch him, a hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. The hallway went silent. It was Grace. "Leave him alone," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Haven't you all done enough?" Sandra yanked her hand back, shock turning quickly to anger. "Who do you think you are?" Sarah stepped forward, her perfect features twisted into a sneer. "Oh, look who's trying to be a hero. The charity case." She turned to address the growing crowd. "Did you know her mother cleans toilets in my house?" The hallway erupted in cruel laughter, but Grace stood her ground. "At least my mother works honestly for a living," she shot back, "unlike some people who have to steal to maintain their perfect image." Sarah's face went pale. For a moment, just a moment, fear flashed across her features. Then she recovered, her trademark smirk returning. "You should be careful what you say, Grace. People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, especially when their mothers depend on my family for their livelihood." The threat was clear. Grace's shoulders slumped slightly, but her eyes remained defiant. William watched this exchange in stunned silence. It was the first time anyone had stood up for him, and it came from the most unexpected source. But more than that, he noticed something interesting: Sarah's reaction to Grace's accusation about stealing. There was a story there, he was sure of it. As the crowd dispersed and students headed to their classes, Grace turned to William. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. William nodded, unable to speak through the lump in his throat. Grace gave him a small smile. "They're not worth your tears, you know. Bullies like Sarah. They only have power if we give it to them." She started to walk away, but William found his voice. "Why?" he called after her. "Why did you help me?" Grace paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Because 2 years ago, when I first started here on scholarship, you were the only one who shared your lunch with me when Sarah and her friends stole mine. You probably don't even remember." She was right. He didn't remember. But standing there in the emptying hallway, mask still firmly in place, William felt something he hadn't felt since the night of the party: hope. What he didn't know then was that this moment would change everything. Grace's act of kindness had not only given him an ally, but had also provided him with the first piece of a puzzle that would eventually bring Sarah's perfect world crashing down. Because sometimes karma doesn't just happen, it needs a little help from unexpected friends. Late one evening, as Grace was helping her mother clean Sarah's mansion, she overheard a heated conversation that would change everything. Sarah's parents, Mr. Michael and Mrs. Linda, were arguing in the study, unaware of Grace's presence outside. "She's out of control." Mrs. Linda's voice was sharp with anger. "Do you know how much money disappeared from my purse last week?" Mr. Michael sighed deeply. "None of our other children have given us this much trouble. Sometimes I wonder if we made a mistake taking her in after her real mother died." Grace froze, her cleaning cloth suspended in mid-air. Sarah's real mother. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more. "She was our housekeeper's daughter. Mrs. Linda continued, her voice softer now. "We thought we could give her a better life, but lately she's becoming more like Maria," Mr. Michael finished, her real mother, always wanting more, never satisfied. Grace's mind was racing. Sarah, the girl who tormented her and her mother, who acted like she was born into privilege, was actually the daughter of a former housekeeper. The irony was almost too perfect. Later that night, Grace found William sitting alone in the school library during lunch period. She slid into the chair across from him, her eyes bright with her discovery. "William," she whispered, "I need to tell you something about Sarah." As Grace shared what she'd overheard, William felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him felt a twisted satisfaction, knowing that Sarah's perfect image was built on a lie. But another part, the part that still remembered being that hopeful boy at the party, felt an unexpected pang of empathy. "Maybe that's why she's so cruel," Grace mused. "She's terrified someone will discover her secret." William looked down at his hands, still soft, still carrying the extra weight that made him a target. "Knowledge is power," he said quietly. "But power without purpose is just another form of cruelty." Grace studied him for a moment, then made a decision that would alter both their lives. "Let me help you," she said. "Help me what?" "Change. Not for Sarah. Not for revenge. For yourself." And so began William's transformation. Every morning before school, Grace would meet him at the local park for workouts. She designed a nutrition plan, teaching him about healthy eating habits she'd learned from her mother's job at a health food store. But the changes weren't just physical. Grace helped William with his confidence, teaching him to stand tall despite the continuing mockery. She showed him how to dress better, how to carry himself with dignity. "Your body is changing," she told him one day, after a particularly grueling workout. "But don't forget to strengthen your heart too, not with hatred, with purpose." Months passed. William's body began to transform, shedding pounds while gaining strength. His face, once round and soft, developed angles. Even his voice seemed to carry more authority. But it was during one of their study sessions that the most significant discovery occurred. William was showing Grace some family photos on his phone when a notification popped up. It was from his cousin Tyler, a rising music star who was gaining popularity on social media. Grace's eyes widened. "Wait, Tyler Bennett is your cousin?" William nodded, not understanding her excitement. "Oh my God," Grace laughed, pulling out her phone. She opened Sarah's social media profile and showed him. There, filling the screen, were hundreds of comments and likes from Sarah on Tyler's posts. She was his biggest fan, constantly begging for his attention. "She has no idea you're related to him, does she?" Grace asked, a slow smile spreading across her face. William stared at the screen, an idea forming in his mind. "No," he said quietly. "She doesn't." That evening, as William scrolled through Sarah's desperate attempts to get Tyler's attention, he felt the final piece of his plan click into place. He opened his phone and called his cousin. "Tyler? I need a favor." Grace noticed the change in William immediately. His workouts became more intense, his focus sharper. It was as if he'd found a missing piece of himself, not in hatred or revenge, but in the promise of justice. "Just remember," Grace cautioned one day, as they watched Sarah strut through the hallways, still queen of her domain. "Karma has a way of collecting debts. Make sure you don't end up owing more than you can pay." William looked at Grace, really looked at her. In the past months, she'd become more than just his trainer or confidant. She'd become his anchor, his moral compass. And something else, something he wasn't ready to name yet. "Some debts," he replied, "are worth paying." As they watched Sarah disappear around the corner, neither of them could have predicted just how high the price of justice would be. because karma wasn't just coming for Sarah, it was coming for all of them, in ways none of them could imagine. With his cousin Tyler's help, William's plan was simple, yet devastating. Tyler gave him control of a secondary private chat account, one that Sarah would believe belonged to her idol. "Just be careful," Tyler warned during their call. "Fame can make people do crazy things." William had no idea how right his cousin would be. The first message to Sarah was casual. "Hey, noticed you're always supporting my music. Thanks for being such a loyal fan." Sarah's response was instant, filled with excitement and emojis. William, watching through Tyler's account, saw a side of Sarah he'd never seen at school. Desperate, eager to please, almost pathetically hungry for attention. "OMG, I can't believe you messaged me. I'm your biggest fan. I know every word to all your songs." As the conversations continued, Sarah began sharing more personal things, trying to impress her idol. She talked about being the most popular girl at school, about her wealthy family, about the upcoming prom. "Everyone expects me to have the perfect date for prom," she wrote one evening. "It's so much pressure being at the top." William's fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. "Maybe I could help with that," he typed. "I have a break in my schedule. Would you like me to be your prom date?" Sarah's response was immediate. "Yes! OMG, yes! Everyone would die!" The plan was in motion, but what William didn't expect was how far Sarah would go to ensure her perfect prom night. One afternoon, Grace overheard Sarah in her room arguing with her parents about prom expenses. "I need a new dress and a limo. Everyone expects me to make a grand entrance with Tyler." "We've already spent too much on your other expenses," Mr. Michael replied firmly. "Use the dress from your last party." After they left, Sarah stood in front of her mirror, her face twisted with determination. "I'll find a way," she whispered to her reflection. "I always do." The next day, Mrs. Linda's prized golden necklaces disappeared. Sarah had taken them while her stepmother was sleeping, selling one to a pawn shop and hiding the other as insurance. But Sarah wasn't content with just stealing. She needed someone else to blame when the theft was discovered. And who better than the household help? Grace watched in horror as Sarah planted one of the necklaces in her mother's cleaning bag. She wanted to speak up, to stop what was about to happen, but fear froze her in place. Her mother's job, their entire livelihood, depended on Sarah's family. The scene played out exactly as Sarah planned. The necklace was discovered in Grace's mother's bag. The police were called. Despite her tears and protests of innocence, Grace's mother was arrested. That evening, Grace showed up at William's house, her eyes red from crying. "She did it," she sobbed. "Sarah framed my mom. She's in jail because of her." William held Grace as she cried, feeling her tears soak through his shirt. His own transformation forgotten, all he could think about was how Sarah's cruelty had escalated beyond mere high school bullying. "We have to stop her," Grace whispered. "Not just for you anymore, but for my mum, for everyone she's hurt." William nodded, his resolve hardening. The plan needed to change. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. It was about justice. He pulled out his phone and opened the chat with Sarah. She was bubbling with excitement about their prom plans, completely oblivious to the pain she'd caused. "I have a special surprise planned for our grand entrance," he typed, his hands steady despite his anger. "Something that will make sure nobody ever forgets that night." Sarah's response made his screen light up with heart emojis. "I can't wait! I've already got everything planned. The dress, the car, everything will be perfect." "Yes," William typed, thinking of Grace's mother sitting in a jail cell. "Perfect." As he set his phone down, William caught his reflection in the window. The physical transformation of the past months was obvious. He was no longer the overweight, insecure boy from the party. But something else had changed too. In his eyes, there was a hardness that hadn't been there before. Grace noticed it too. "Just promise me something," she said quietly. "Promise me you won't lose yourself in this revenge. The William I know, the one who shared his lunch with a scholarship student 2 years ago. He's too good for that." William squeezed her hand but made no promises, because sometimes he was learning being good wasn't enough. Sometimes justice demanded a higher price, and as prom night approached, that price would prove to be higher than any of them could have imagined. The night of the prom arrived with electric anticipation in the air. Sarah stood in her room, admiring her reflection in the full-length mirror. The dress she'd bought with the stolen necklace money was everything she'd dreamed of, a shimmering masterpiece that had cost more than most families' monthly rent. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Tyler. "On my way. Get ready for your perfect night." Sarah's heart raced. Everything she'd done, the theft, the lies, framing Grace's mother, it would all be worth it when she made her grand entrance with Tyler Bennett on her arm. Meanwhile, in another part of town, William adjusted his tie in his own mirror. The reflection that stared back at him was unrecognizable from 2 years ago. Gone was the insecure, overweight boy. In his place stood a transformed young man, his rented tuxedo fitting perfectly on his athletic frame. Grace appeared behind him, a vision in a simple blue dress. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her eyes meeting his in the mirror. "Your mother is still in jail," he replied softly, "and Sarah's still walking around like she owns the world." Grace touched his arm. "Just remember, after tonight, there's no going back." At the prom venue, excitement buzzed through the air as students arrived in their finest attire. Sarah had deliberately arrived late, wanting to ensure everyone would be there to witness her triumph. She waited outside, checking her phone constantly. When a message finally came, "I'm here," her heart nearly stopped. A figure approached through the darkness, wearing a long coat and mask. Sarah frowned slightly at the strange attire, but dismissed her concerns. Artists were eccentric after all. "Tyler?" she called out, her voice trembling with excitement. The figure nodded but didn't speak. He offered his arm, and Sarah took it, too excited to notice how rough and weathered the hand felt. They made their way to the entrance. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Sarah and her mysterious date entered. All eyes were on them, phones raised to capture what everyone expected to be the moment of the year. Sarah beamed, soaking in the attention. "Everyone's watching," she whispered to her masked companion. "Should we reveal who you are?" The figure nodded again. Sarah stepped forward, claiming everyone's attention. "Everyone," she announced, her voice ringing with triumph. "I'd like you to introduce my date for the evening, Tyler Bennett." The crowd gasped in anticipation as the figure reached for his mask. But when it came off, the gasps turned to shocked silence. Standing there wasn't the famous Tyler Bennett, but a homeless man with missing teeth and a scraggly beard. His coat fell open to reveal tattered clothes underneath. The silence lasted for 3 heartbeats before the laughter began. Not the cruel, orchestrated laughter from William's humiliation 2 years ago, but genuine, uncontrollable laughter at the sight of Sarah's perfect night crumbling. What is this?" Sarah stammered, backing away from the homeless man. "Where's Tyler?" "Sorry, honey," the man said kindly. "The nice young man paid me $100 to wear this mask and walk you in. Said something about karma." The laughter grew louder. Phones were recording everything, just as they had 2 years ago at Sarah's party. But this time, she was the one being humiliated. "No," she whispered, her perfect world cracking. "No, no, no." That's when William and Grace made their entrance. The crowd parted automatically, stunned by William's transformation. He was no longer the boy they had laughed at. He was something else entirely. Sarah's eyes widened as recognition dawned. "You—" she gasped. "You did this." William stepped forward, his voice carrying across the now silent room. 2 years ago, you taught me what it feels like to be humiliated. Consider this your graduation gift." Sarah's face contorted with rage. "Do you know who I am? Who my family is?" "You mean your adoptive family?" William asked quietly. "The ones who took you in after your real mother, their housekeeper, died." The colour drained from Sarah's face. Around them, new whispers started, not of laughter now, but of shock at this revelation. "That's right," William continued. "The great Sarah Mitchell, who looks down on people like Grace and her mother, is herself the daughter of a housekeeper. Still think you're better than everyone else?" Sarah's perfect mask cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She turned and ran, just as William had done 2 years ago. But karma wasn't finished with her yet. In her blind panic, Sarah jumped into her rented luxury car, the one she'd paid for with the stolen necklace money. She sped away from the prom venue, her vision blurred by tears, her mind reeling from the public exposure of her secrets. She didn't see the tree until it was too late. The crash wasn't fatal, but it was devastating, both to the car and to what remained of Sarah's carefully constructed world. As she stood there, looking at the wreckage of the rented car she couldn't afford to replace, her phone buzzed one final time. It was a message from her parents. "We know everything. About the necklaces. About what you did to Grace's mother. Don't bother coming home. Your grandmother's address is in your email. Good luck." Sarah sank to her knees on the cold pavement, her perfect dress getting soaked by puddles from the earlier rain. Everything she'd built her life on, the lies, the cruelty, the fake perfection, had come crashing down in a single night. Back at the prom, William watched the videos of Sarah's humiliation already spreading across social media. He should have felt triumphant, but instead, he felt strangely empty. Grace squeezed his hand. Was it worth it? William looked at her, then at his phone, then back at the prom, continuing around them as if nothing had happened. "Ask me tomorrow," he said quietly. "Because sometimes, even when karma delivers exactly what you asked for, the taste of revenge isn't as sweet as you imagined it would be." A week after prom night, the videos of Sarah's humiliation had gone viral, just as William's had 2 years ago. The comments were brutal, filled with laughing emojis and harsh judgments. The mighty queen had fallen, and the internet showed no mercy. But for William, victory felt hollow. Each night he found himself re-watching the video, seeing Sarah's face crumble as her secrets were exposed. He remembered that feeling, the way shame could burn through your soul. Had he become what he hated most? Grace's mother was finally released from jail after Sarah's parents came forward with the truth about the stolen necklaces. The charges were dropped, but the damage was done. 2 weeks in jail had left its mark. "They offered me my job back," Grace's mother told them one evening, her hands trembling slightly as she poured coffee, with a raise and an apology. "Are you going to take it?" Grace asked. Her mother smiled sadly. "Sometimes forgiveness is the heaviest burden to carry. But yes, I will. We all make mistakes, even rich people who think they're perfect." William shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Have you heard anything about Sarah?" Grace nodded. "She's living with her grandmother now, in a small town upstate. Had to leave school and everything. Someone said she's working as a waitress." The mighty Sarah Mitchell, serving tables. 2 years ago, this news would have filled William with satisfaction. Now it just made him feel tired. Later that night, as William drove Grace home, she broke their comfortable silence. "You know, Revenge is funny, she said, looking out at the passing streetlights. You spend so much time planning it, dreaming about it, but when it's done... It doesn't fix anything, William finished. Doesn't take away what happened. Grace turned to him. But something good did come from all this. What's that? You found yourself, not because of the revenge, but because you learned you were stronger than you thought. And... She hesitated. We found each other. William pulled the car over, turning to face her. In the soft glow of the streetlights, he saw not just Grace, but everything she represented. Kindness, strength, the choice to rise above cruelty rather than perpetuate it. I've been thinking, he said slowly. Maybe we should reach out to Sarah. Grace raised an eyebrow. Really? Not to apologize exactly, but to... I don't know. Show her there's a way back from rock bottom. I should know. I've been there. The next day they drove to the small diner where Sarah now worked. Through the window they could see her. No designer clothes now, just a simple uniform. Her face was bare of makeup, and she looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. When they walked in, Sarah froze at their table, coffee pot trembling in her hand. If you're here to laugh... She started, but William cut her off. We're not. We're here to order coffee, and maybe to talk. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Why? After what I did to you? To your mother? She glanced at Grace. Because 2 years ago, William said quietly, I thought revenge would heal me. But you know what did? Letting go, having people believe in me. Maybe you need that too. Sarah sank into the booth across from them, her facade finally cracking completely. I'm sorry, she whispered, for everything. I was so scared of people finding out who I really was, I became someone worse. Grace reached across the table, taking Sarah's hand. Sometimes we have to lose everything to find ourselves. As they sat there, 3 broken people beginning to heal, William realized something profound. Karma wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoration, about finding the courage to break the cycle of pain. So, he said, managing a small smile, how about that coffee? Sarah wiped her eyes, a genuine smile breaking through. On the house. Outside, the sun was setting on another day, but for 3 young people in a small diner, it felt more like a dawn. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making someone fall, it's helping them get back up. And in the end, that's what truly sets us free. Thank you for taking time to witness this story with us. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Every story we share is meant to move and transform. If you found inspiration in today's tale, simply leave a 9 below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Until our next story unfolds,